Hello, welcome back to BLENDERSUSHI Live Noding. In this episode, I'm going to do some explorations in Blender Cycles node, especially an image and then its relations with UV and how you can kind of disturb the UV or deform, rotate, scale, translate, whatever, to get a different kind of result. So first of all, I'm gonna get one of this UV grid. The one from Blender actually it's okay, but it's just like this is checker pattern. You can use that, or at some point we will probably learn how to generate this kind of UV pattern. For now, we're just gonna grab one of these. I'll pick the one that looks nice. Maybe this. I'll grab this one from UV texture grids from Pixel CG. I'm gonna give credits to this block first, UV texture grids. Normally people use these UV grids to check the poly UV, just to see stretching or to see how the image gonna map into polygon. Since this is actually taking a bit of time, I already downloaded it and we can use it in Blender. So where is it? UV. Well, I'm just gonna import it into Blender. File, import. Oh, first of all, we're gonna work in cycle, so make sure this switch to cycles render. This is the more modern render engine in Blender. Import images as planes, and for what we are doing, I'm gonna enable emission, so the image is always like self-lit. We don't need to use light in order to see the textures. And let's grab our UV. So it's called Ash UV grid. Apparently that's the one. And I'm gonna center it. I'm gonna turn on texture so we can have a look. File, save as, UV manipulation. We can manipulate this using Blender's own procedural way to do it, or you can use animation nodes or Sverchok. We will see each one of them. So go switch to compositing, have a look at the texture. Okay, we simply have, if I'll go to edit mode, okay, this is just a plane with 4 vertices and this texture. View, top view. Now I'm gonna switch to cycles and then have a look at the material nodes tree at the moment. So we have emissions, material output, image texture, and don't know what it is. Don't worry about that. We're just gonna worry about image texture. And you can see here it's got this vector. Normally for the vector we plug in things like one of these, whether it's generated or normal UV. If the object actually have its own UV, object, camera, windows. Generated, if you don't have any UV, you can just plug in generated. What's interesting about this image texture is that with the vector is you can plug all kind of values, including the attribute nodes. And this attribute node is going to be something that we use if we are using animation nodes or Sverchok to kind of disturb the image texture positioning. And it doesn't, apparently it works on a per point basis as well. So if we give like a random vector to disturb the points of the UV, it's gonna disturb the image as well. So we're gonna try, let's say we use the generated and we don't have any changes at the moment. Let me try if I use a vector math here and try to move this thing around. Apparently it doesn't have any effects unless we actually render it out. So because it's cycles, and then you have to, it's okay, this is kind of interactive though. So now I'm hoping that we can kind of translate the UV. Okay, so you can see this is the default. It's using the generated texture coordinate for the UV. Obviously it's give you like a exactly like a plane, because this is square UV and it's just straightforward flat. If we actually play around with the vector here, we can translate it. So negative value kind of translating it to the right, and positive value translating it to the right, and it's kind of, the UV is kind of repeating itself based on the, because of this generated. I believe that the image texture also have a attribute that deals with this repeating pattern. So by default it's repeat, but we can clip it. So if I clip it and then I move the image now, you see it's being pushed in position, and at some point it's gonna disappear. We don't have the background. I'm gonna turn on background as well, just so it's clear. So we have our mesh here, just a single polygon, and then we have an image then being pushed in position, ups and down. The Z, I don't think the Z has any effects. So this is like transforming the UV is not actually super straightforward. Positioning seems to be easy enough, but scaling and rotations can be super tricky. Actually, Blender has also its own way to do that. There's a node called mapping. So mapping is sort of kind of doing this kind of thing, like positioning, rotation, scaling. You either use texture, point, vector, normal, whatever. You can give this a try. The Z doesn't work. Rotation doesn't seem to work. Actually, the Z rotation seems to work. This guy is not always like 100% easy to understand, but you know, you can scale and then you can do that kind of thing using the mapping node. I have an example from another Blender artist, I think Maurice. I think he has this example where you recreate the positioning, scaling, and rotations using nodes, recreating everything from scratch, and you can have more control. For now, we don't need to worry about this. We're just gonna try to modify this ourselves. So there is one interesting thing. 1 second. I'll try to use manual vertex painting here and give it like a red color, blue color, green, and leave it at white. And this is the same mesh that's currently rendering, right? And I'm gonna zero this out. With this guy currently being selected, we know that this guy now have vertex informations, and it's being called call. So we can use that value. We're just doing a painting, and then if we use this color value or the vector plug into this guy, we can actually manipulate the position. You see, red, fully red, and then image disappear. Let me try other color like blue. Okay, blue is kind of moving this guy. If I give it like a different color, you see it has some kind of reactions into the texture. If I turn on extend or repeat, we're gonna get a repeating texture, so we can see what's going on. I'm gonna use just clip so we can see, green, apparently green kind of didn't do much effects. It's actually, I think the value is based on RGB, and green has like it's gonna move the B, which is the Z axis, so it doesn't do much, but the red and green gives a lot of effects. So the red, if I use all the red, it's gonna get pushed to the left until it disappears, and then green kind of moving it right, but green is kind of blue is kind of putting it back. It's easier probably if we use combine XYZ value here. Plug that in. So X, this is RGB. Imagine RGB1 is kind of pushing it that way because it's value of 1, and then with the RGB, the green value is kind of pushing it down. It doesn't have negative value. Z-axis doesn't do much, so just these two value. You can add a random value to that, but we're not gonna do that. What I'm going to do next is to use noise. Actually, before I jump into animation nodes, I'm gonna use noise. Let's try texture. So Blender cycles, of course, come with all these really cool procedural textures. You can use brick, checker, environment, whatever. The one I like to use is noise and Musgrave. Texture and noise. And by some kind of magic, this guy actually have this vector. This is actually a single value that you can use to disturb the texture. So if I render this guy out, and I'm gonna cut this back to original, and then if I plug in the Musgrave, for example, it's gonna have effects. I found it to be like a really cool way to generate all kind of random textures. You can definitely use your own image texture, any kind of photos, and you can just play around with this function force. We can call it like a fractal, but they are basically disturbing this UV. Okay. And there's like endless pattern you can just play with. I actually really like this. If you turn on the repeat or extend, you get a more psychedelic kind of result. I like the repeat. See, that's quite cool, and you can kind of tell what this parameter does. You don't know exactly what's going on, but you kind of just worry about the result. So you can have like all kind of pattern, and in fact, it's I kind of wondering if we can further randomize this. If we use this vector, plug into that guy, so we can stretch it more, add some kind of randomness. What I found interesting though, it's okay, we can use Musgrave texture, whatever procedural texture that's Blender provided. Even noise is looking like quite amazingly like a painting. You can apparently do a little bit more. I'm gonna use animation nodes in this for this one. Animation nodes has something that I like. Let's have like a couple of this grid first of all. So we have this original one. This is the master. I'm gonna turn on animation nodes and then get the object instancer. object instancer. Gonna grab this master guy, and then let's have a grid of this. Have a grid mesh. How many? 5 by 5. Too many, maybe for now. 4 by 4, 16. We're gonna have 16 of this grid. So let's use loop and have a vector position. Plug this guy into the instancing. Turn on copy full objects and dip copy, and this guy goes into the vector list. Object transform output. Just use the location of the vector and the objects. Now we have this. We can arrange it slightly better. So by default, each one of them will have the same exact material without any kind of variations. What's interesting though, if we actually I'm gonna use this thing called set vertex color. And set vertex color in animation nodes is basically super simple, super basic. It's just a single color that's gonna colorize the vertex color. If I switch to let me check. If I switch to the vertex pane, for example, and look at this guy and give it a color, doesn't seem to change. Okay, maybe because we need to look at one of these guy, texture, vertex pane. Now they're getting the color from animation nodes, right? And we can give a random color for each one of these very easily. So if I switch back to cycles nodes, material nodes, and if I just use the color plugged into the material and then render it out, we can see, okay, we have green value. If we switch to animation nodes and then change this to different color, okay, we have different color. What's really cool is that we can use some kind of random color for this. By the way, these guys are all different objects. Okay, different objects based on this guy. And for each object and animation nodes, we can give it a different set of vertex color. That's basically the idea. So we can, if we use like a combined color and plug this guy in there, now we have black. If I increase the saturation and value and then change the hue, now we can have like a rainbow color. Especially if I use like this index and iterations, and the output goes into the hue, we should have like a rainbow color, unless I forgot something. Okay, not multiply but divide. Okay, random color, because by dividing index divided by iteration is going to be the total number of the objects. Iteration will start from 0 to the last total number of the objects. By dividing that, we have a value that goes range from 0 to 1 in the floating values, and we can plug that into the hue. We can also use random number if you like. Random number and index plugged into the seed, and this plugged into that guy. So we have this random number that we can have variations. Okay, these numbers range from 0 to 1. Okay, 0 to 1, and I believe that's actually kind of the clamping limit of the cycles attribute nodes. Anyway, you cannot have minus number, I don't think, unless you're using vector. I don't know, I haven't tried it, but let's have a look how this is affecting our texture. So back to our texture, we have this guy, and if I use this color to influence the vector, so we have the noise here, and if I use the vector into the noise, we lost the noise texture, so we need to use a vector math in here. So now I have, if I look from the top, I believe I have all these variations per object. So yeah, this one and this one are different, and they are slightly kind of moved. They're moved like in a color kind of way. The noise itself doesn't change much. So that seems to work. If I go back to animation nodes, let me turn maybe increase the exposure first. Come on. Back to animation nodes and look at this guy. If I randomize the node seed, we can see that it's also changing in the render. So now we have actually a way to randomize image position slightly within this limit value using animation nodes. I try using minus, and I don't think minus actually works well. If I'm using a texture, go back to this guy. I'm gonna use a different texture. Maybe I will use. I have this Buddha image from the internet. Okay, maybe we don't use the noise yet for now. Let's simplify this. Texture coordinate, generate, and then don't use noise yet. Noise is cool, but we're gonna use that later. Let's cut this. We have this Buddha image. Let me increase the exposure. Buddha image plus the color. Now we can see that the Buddha image being pushed by the vector from animation nodes. Let me go back to animation nodes and let's have a look. I'm not sure if negative value is possible, but I might be wrong. It might actually work like that. So now for each object, I can sort of shift the Buddha image. If I go back to this guy and use clipping instead of repeat, you can see it more clearly. Okay, some of the Buddha image being pushed very far. Back to animation nodes. Let's try between 0 and 1. Same result, maybe between minus 0.5 and 0.5. This is also interesting. Let me try using this value, plug into the hue. Actually, if I cut that and then I'm using a color here, like this is black value, right? No influence whatever from animation nodes. If I use white color, which means RGB is going to be 111, it's being pushed that way. We cannot have negative value, unfortunately, in animation nodes, unless we can do it differently. Let me try. Combine color nodes. Actually, this guy. Let's see if I can use negative value in RGB. So yeah, I can use negative value here, but it doesn't have any effects here. So apparently, maybe the attribute nodes kind of clamping the value between 0 and 1. Unfortunately, that's how it is. That's okay. I guess we can still work with a 0 to 1 value. So 1 1, actually 1 is pushing that guy that way to the bottom. So if we use a value between 0 and 1, maybe between 0 and 0.5, plug this guy into the red and green, so we have some kind of variations that way. Let's see what else we can do here. One thing to be clear again, in animation nodes, set vertex color really giving this one color for every vertex. But if you're curious and then really want to do this, you can have different color for each and every points, basically. So we are not limited to one color per object. We can have variations of color, which is coming from Sverchok, for example. So if I delete this, I'm gonna delete this guy, right, in animation nodes, and then okay, let's don't do that. Don't give color in animation nodes. Just place the object. So I'm using animation nodes to do this instancing, but I'm gonna use Sverchok to do the coloring. So I'm gonna save this real quick. I'm gonna grab this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just select all these 16 objects, and then gonna use objects in Sverchok, get selection, and then here I'm gonna use a vertex color new, and I'm gonna plug in the objects there, and then gonna give a random. We don't have random color yet. Random vector should be okay. Random vector into this guy, and then we know that each object have 4 vertices, so we don't actually need that many number of vertices. This gonna do it for every single mesh. So let's give a color. Actually, by default, Sverchok gonna put the vertex color into attributes called SV call. So if we go back to cycles, we're gonna use SV call, and this hopefully will do some kind of randomizations to our image. Okay, there you go. That's actually Sverchok doing it. And if I randomize the seed, we can see we get different value. If you want a different random distortion for each of the objects, you can use a range integer. Plug into the seed, and how many counts? 16. We have 16, so 16 objects. And now we can really have random variations. Yeah, there's one unfortunate thing is that the attribute kind of limited to the value between 0 and 1, so that's unfortunate, but still this is can be interesting. You can distort it any way you like, and then if you actually enable repeat, you don't really see the limitations, kind of just distorting the image. Maybe at some point you don't want to just randomize or distorting the image. You want to have more control over the position. For that, I'll have to do some kind of research, maybe using the nodes that's kind of separating the texture coordinates. If I use the texture coordinate, actually the mapping node, this guy makes actually maybe we can randomize the locations this way, because one interesting fact is each object can have this unique custom attributes, and this comes from, I know this comes from the color vertex color at the moment, and I don't know if it has some kind of a clamping limit, but we can use this to affect the vector, I believe so. So if we plug them in and plug the color or the vector in there, so we have that. It's pretty, it's more random than I originally thought. Min and max. This one doesn't have limit actually. So I don't know, I think we can make our own nodes that kind of does the mapping nodes. But anyhow, if you wanna play around, you can use the noise texture, or maybe I like the Musgrave vector, plug into this guy, into this guy, and we have this unlimited variations of color or design. Musgrave is particularly interesting. It's like I don't know, it's like a topology design. You can play with the detail dimension. I'm not sure if this actually works, but object info, and there's this random. Oh, actually that actually works. So this is, if you have like per object, if you have multiple objects all in different locations, you can just use this random, and this can randomize the scale, detail, dimension, and that's also takes into the effects into this image and UV. So yeah, unusual, yes, I think actually I really like this. Take a lot of very interesting scale. Scale it really big. The difference is subtle, but there are definitely differences. And if we go back to animation nodes, duplications, if we say, okay, make it like 400 different variations with a distance of 1, and we go back to Sverchok, and then okay, Sverchok, how many objects do we have now? 400. 400, then 400 is okay, I know. We need to select all of this object. Select all the objects and then get selection in Sverchok, and now we have how many? We have 400 objects, and each one of them with the UV slightly disturbed. So we have this, and that's really nice. So imagine you have like I don't know how you can use this, but you definitely if you are using graphic design and you want to have pattern variations, you have this methods to do that. Back to cycles, you can use noise texture or Musgrave, whatnot. And yeah, this is like a totally random, and they're all different and unique. Yeah, I like to have this on the wall. It's very cool. It's based on the Buddha pictures, but you can use your own photos. Yeah, that's pretty much it. It's meshing around with noise and UV using animation nodes